Who was John Calvin and why is he important? Did you hear Pastor John's prayer here tonight? A prayer. Come on. If we, oh, thank you. Oh, yeah. Off to a good start. My recorder. No. Wait a minute. I got it right here.
By the way,
Shuffle your feet.
feel free to see any of us or email us if you have a topic you'd like us to consider covering next year. Or sometime we're going to cover R.J. Rushdoony. We sell most of his books, but we really never told everyone about him and who he is, etc. But any other topic, let us know. We'll see if we can get it in the queue.
Thank you. I think we are ready to go now. And I just want to re-echo what Toby said about coming out on Thursday night. I hope you're able to support us at the Berks Patriots meeting there in Leesport. Meet in the farmers market there. We don't know how many opportunities we'll get like this to speak to these folks. We're really excited about it. This is really what we had in mind, quite frankly, when we began to put the Mid-Atlantic Reformation Society together here a few 3, 4, 5 years ago. I've already heard John's presentation. And it's definitely not a let's all get together and elect Republicans presentation. Definitely not. It's not that. So we hope you can come out there and support us as well. We're just thrilled to be there. We just want to thank you all right now for your support over the years, because it's your support that has made our opportunity with the Berks Patriots possible. We hope we get other opportunities as well. Don't know if we'll get any more of the Berks Patriots after Thursday night, but hey, I don't think John the Baptist got to tell off Herod more than one time. But he got to tell him off once.
Am I losing my head over here?
John and John.
Better stop there, Joel. John's getting wet.
Talking me out of it.
Yeah, I was going to do the presentation myself, but then I thought better of it. No. Getting on to our topic tonight, John Calvin. Who was he? Why is he important? Why is he hated so? Now I want to go back to Pastor John's prayer tonight. He prayed that corruption would be banished from the halls of government. Now, I mean, can we even say that without laughing? Do we think that could be a serious prayer? Really, that corruption would be banished from the halls of government? Can that actually happen? Well, we're going to study a man tonight who oversaw that happen in his own lifetime. So the answer is yes, it has happened. And it can and must happen again. Before I get into it tonight, anybody see the, at times we want to kind of bring up a contemporary issue. Anybody see the couple in England that's having their Hobbit house bulldozed? Anybody see that? That couple told to pull down their Hobbit home made entirely out of natural materials, but without planning permission. Family of 3 is made homeless by planning inspector's decision. They built their home from scratch, but have been ordered to tear it down. The couple admit they built it without first getting planning permission. In a lot of Christian circles, that's right up there with, that's like a great sin. That's right up there with breaking the speed limit, for Pete's sake. Didn't get planning permission. What were they thinking? Their labor of love was branded harmful to the countryside. Now, they made their home entirely out of natural materials. Now, we've talked about the fraud that is environmentalism here in the Mid-Atlantic Reformation Society before. But when you have powerful statist people making the decisions, they will come off as if they care about things that you and I care about. But in the end, if they aren't subject to Christ, they're all about power. They might start out as public servants. Remember that term, public servant? You've heard that term before, right? Public servant. It's all about power. Charlie Haig and Megan Williams built the roundhouse from scratch with their own hands using only natural materials. And I saw the photos. It's a lot of wood and so forth. But the couple lost their appeal against a planning enforcement notice telling them to tear down their pride and joy home. Charlie and Megan, who have a 1-year-old son, built a house on private land in England, someplace. I can't pronounce it. Locals nicknamed it the Hobbit House, although most people did not even know it was there because it is so secluded. But the county council ordered the couple to demolish their home because it was built without planning permission. Charlie and Megan, who live a self-sufficient lifestyle, fought the decision, claiming it had a low impact on the environment. I guess so, most of the people didn't even know it was there, right? Low impact on the environment because of its unique construction. We were born in the area, went to school here, and have lived here all our lives. We wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And Megan says, oh, well, the pair acknowledged that the property was built without prior consent, but said there was no other way for them to afford their own home. And if you get a chance to look at it, it's in the Daily Mail. And if you go Hobbit House Daily Mail, you do a Google search, you will find it. Now, why are we talking about that? My friends, there's only two laws. There's the law of God and there's the law of the jungle. That's it. There's no third law here. And this is the law of the jungle. Telling someone to bulldoze their house that they built on private property because we can. That's what's happening here. We can tell you to tear it down, and you will tear down your house because we said so. And that's it. Remember how we constantly say in the Middle Reformation Society here, constantly say, there's the law of God, there's the law of man, and that's it. There's no third opportunity. And this here shows it very, very clearly. Law of God, law of man. You know what? We vote for the law of man. Tear your house down because we are the law of man after all. There's no third way, my friends. And I know that in our Christian circles, a lot of our friends, they don't like the idea that people stand up and say, hey, it's the law of God or the law of man. They like to think there's some third way. We've all heard about natural law, right? Yeah, natural law. We all agree on natural law. Well, I guess somebody's natural law is tear down your natural house. That's somebody's idea of some sort of natural law. John Calvin came to Geneva and it was a complete mess. A total disaster. In fact, he didn't even want to come. Let's let George Grant pick up the story for us. For nearly a quarter century, John Calvin had led the Swiss city of Geneva with tireless devotion. In the process, he not only brought the city to a place of great prominence and prosperity, he also had planted the seeds of our modern democratic freedoms, our representative governing institutions, and our free and open economic markets. Did you hear that? Do you think that anybody else in the world can be given that kind of credit? Let me read that again from George Grant and Greg Wilbur. George Grant, by the way, writer of over 30 books, a thoroughgoing scholar. He planted the seeds of our modern democratic freedoms, our representative governing institutions, and our free and open economic markets. Can you picture North America without those? Well, I guess it's getting a little bit easier every day, isn't it? Yeah, I guess you can picture it because it's right in front of us. But from at least what we were, Grant is giving Calvin the credit of beginning that for us. George Grant is simply saying, you know who the real founding father was of America? We talk about founding fathers all the time, talk about patriots. George Grant saying the real founding father was John Calvin. What a statement. He goes on to say this. When he first came to Geneva in July 1536, he intended to spend just one night. He had just recently published his first edition of his magisterial work of systematic theology, The Institutes of the Christian Religion. In Paris, he had received a fine classical education in preparation for a career in either the church or in law. As a result, he had a highly developed and disciplined mind. William Farel, the leader of the Protestant movement in the city of Geneva, he was already there when Calvin came, and one of the most prominent evangelists and preachers anywhere in Europe, saw in Calvin the gifts and callings necessary to take the Reformation to the next necessary stage of development. I want to stop there. Take the Reformation to the next necessary stage of development. He's talking about reforming everything. Does that interest us? Reforming everything? Or do we have a stopping point at the comfort level? He attempted to persuade Calvin to stay, but the young man resisted his plea. The city was not ready, he argued, for an authentic and consistent reform. It seemed to him that sin ran rampant through the streets day and night. Farel would not take no for an answer. He fulminated with warnings as if from the Lord. In the end, Calvin finally relented. Thus began an odd partnership between the fiery Farel and the scholarly Calvin. Alas, it quickly became apparent that Calvin was right about the condition of the city. As I read about the condition of the city, I want you to think about the conditions that we face today. Within a year, the two reformers were expelled from the city. When given the news, Calvin calmly replied, "If we had sought to please men, we should have been badly rewarded, but we serve a higher master who will not withhold from us our reward." He settled into a much quieter life as a pastor in nearby Strasbourg. We'll hear a little bit later on just how rough that city was. A horrible city. Beyond Reformation. You know, it reminds me of what William Carey faced when he first went to India. William Carey, the great Protestant missionary that came from England in the late 1700s, when travel was almost impossible. It took him nearly a year to get from England to India at the time. And he's probably lucky to get there that fast. And he got there, and even his Christian community back home said, "You know what, you are wasting your time with these people. They're too far gone. They're half animals. Don't waste your time with the Indian people." Is that our view today when we take a look around and see what's happening? Is that the way we think? Well, why Geneva matters. We'll begin with the following questions. Who has influenced you? We all are influencers, and we all have influencers. Who's influenced you? How would you know? How would you be able to measure the influence of the ones that influence you? How would you know it? What personal advantage, this is important, came to those who influenced you? Were they better off as a result? Or were they worse off, at least in some ways? And that goes on with number 4. What price did they pay? Any father knows that if you're going to influence your family, you're going to pay a price. You're going to give up on some of the things that you think is really important. You just might have to take a summer off from the church softball team to be with your family, maybe. I'm not picking on softball. There's plenty of other things to take a break from. By what standard do you judge any influence? How do you know it's good or bad? And then, sixthly, can you picture the world without this influencer? Can you picture your own world, your own life? What would your life be like without this person that influenced you? How different would it be? Where would you be? Why John Calvin is or can be a difficult study. First of all, he's misunderstood. Secondly, his legacy was under attack from the beginning of his career. He settles in Geneva, and before he knows it, he's out of there, thrown out. He had many enemies. Has many enemies, even today. He certainly challenged the status quo, not always a popular thing to do. And he never really cared about being remembered. Sometimes people that don't care about being remembered are difficult to study because it's hard to find material on them. Fortunately, that's not the case with John Calvin. When he died, he insisted on being buried in an anonymous plot. And to this day, it's not known exactly where he's buried. They're guessing, they think they know where it is, but no one really knows, apparently. And then sixthly, he definitely never smiled for his photo ops. You know, do you want this guy to come and be your pastor? I mean, come on, in this day of worship bands and you gotta have you gotta have the right look, you know. I don't think this guy has it. Well, let's talk about his role as we move on here. Why? Oh, I didn't change this. Luther challenged the reigning ecclesiastical. Forget about the why there. I meant to fix that. I didn't. Luther challenged the reigning ecclesiastical paradigm, which at that time consisted entirely of the Church of Rome, and Calvin stepped into the breach. In other words, Luther was able to stand up and say, "This is what's wrong. This is what has to come down." And no one was more effective than Luther. I encourage you, if you ever have time to do it, just read some of his speeches. Read, for example, although I disagree with some of the things that he said, his appeal to the German nobility, for example. He just had a way with words. He could use them so strongly. I just am so jealous when I read the guy, when I get a chance to do that. But he was able to, shall we say, tear down the house of cards of Rome. But when you tear the house down, you have to build something else. You know, you can't just put off the old man and be done. Paul tells us you got to put off the old man and what? Put on the new one. That is to say that while Luther burnt down the house of apostasy and bondage, Calvin built another house. Luther cursed the darkness while Calvin lit the torches that would guide the Reformation down to the present day. And I really believe this. Without Calvin, we may never have heard of Luther. I think he just would have been another, maybe priest, you know, somebody who's really into the history of the time might have heard of him. But I think the movement would have just kind of like flared up, kind of like a comet going across the sky, lights everything up, dies, and then moves on. Calvin came along and he built the house. Well, why or how, shall I say, was he so effective? I want to read just a short passage from David Martin Lloyd-Jones on the effectiveness of Calvin. He says this: Calvin's main feature is that he bases everything on the Bible. Calvin's, he does not have a mixture of Aristotle's philosophy and the scripture, with the first practically as important as the second, as in the Summa of Thomas Aquinas, who came years earlier. The Bible for Calvin is the only authority, and he does not wish for any philosophy apart from that which emanates from the scriptures. It is in the Institutes that one gets biblical theology for the first time, rather than dogmatic theology. Calvin does not reason in an inductive way like the Roman Catholics, but rather he draws conclusions and works out in a deductive way that which is taught in the Bible. Calvin came along and he said, look, if it's really true what Proverbs says, the Lord gives wisdom, out of his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. When you understand the fear of the Lord, now you understand righteousness, justice, equity, every good path. Did you ever read that in Proverbs? Did you ever think about what that says? Only from God will you understand righteousness, justice, equity, every good path. You know, it's an amazing thing to see these guys wrangling in Washington. You know, they don't understand the value of morality and righteousness at all. For them, it's just like a new policy. Something wrong? Let's introduce a new policy. They don't understand. And you know what? Until they go back to the Lord who gives wisdom, they're never going to get it right. There's no shot whatsoever. Well, I trust that's nothing new to this audience. But David Martin Lloyd-Jones, when he made that statement, he made me think about something, and that was that I had to ask myself, do I really reason from the scriptures in everything I think? Do I really start with the scriptures and then take it out? Or am I going the other way? Am I taking everything out here in my little experience and bringing it back to the scriptures and then have the scriptures make sense in the light of whatever I thought is true and right from out here? Calvin didn't do that. He started with the scriptures and went out from there. Well, let's talk a little bit more about his about his situation. Here's his life, born in 1509. So he would have been, for all you Reformation historians out there, how old was Calvin when Luther did his 95 Theses thing? Who said 8? 7 or 8, yeah, exactly. Would have been a young man. He begins the work of Reformation in Geneva in 1536, but you see what happened in 1538. It's time to call it a day, right? Just 2 years and he gets thrown out. You see, he ran afoul of the authorities from the very beginning because he insisted on the independence of the church from the state. See, at that time, the state. Now think about this for a minute. If all you have is the law of the jungle, and up until recently, in England, guess who was head of the church? Up until very recently. The Anglican Church, guess who was the head? Queen is right. The Queen was defender of the faith. The Queen was head of church and state, if not officially, or if not unofficially, at least officially, as much as anyone even cared. You see, this was a big thing for Calvin to come along and say to the city fathers, you have no right to tell us who we can serve communion to in our church. We will defend the Lord's table, not you. You take care of the civil stuff. We will take care of our church. That was radical. Now, we don't think about that at all, but can you see Calvin's influence? The victory that we have today of relative freedom, if I can overstate the case, from the state, that's Calvin's victory. It didn't start with him, but it certainly was magnified. It's John Calvin's victory that we celebrate and that we enjoy and that we appreciate. Well, he got kicked out. They were done with him. So he went to Strasbourg and had a quiet little pastorate there for 3 years, which he must have loved, except that he was extremely poor. Had to sell his books in order to keep eating. Can you? That's like Rush Limbaugh selling his voice box to keep eating, right? You think a guy like John Calvin, student extraordinaire, selling his books so he could keep going, but he had to. He's extremely poor there. But with Martin Butzer, he had a ministry. Well, he's there for 3 years. What do you think's happening back in Geneva while he's gone? Well, things went from horrible to even more horrible. And guess who's bugging him to come back? And of course, at first Calvin says, no. Of course I'm not coming back. You already kicked me out. What, am I going to pick it up and move back? And then you're going to kick me out again? I'm not going to do it. But the city fathers kept bothering him. What finally pushed him over the edge, from what I can tell, it's really kind of hard for me to figure out exactly what happened here, but it appears as if this is interesting, the Genevan businessmen prevail on Calvin to come back. And it appears as if when he saw the business community behind him, that's when he decided to come back. He sure didn't trust the councilman, that's for sure. So there he works for quite a while, 1541 to 1533 and longer, but then we have that little problem of Michael Servetus. Now we have to bring up the Michael Servetus thing. How many of you, I just want to see hands here, have never heard of Michael Servetus and you're like, what? How in the world is this popping up into this thing? Few of you have just never heard of Michael. Okay, Michael Servetus. Okay, we have to talk about him because whenever you get out there and defend John Calvin, somebody pops up Michael Servetus, and that's supposed to be an argument ender. We'll get to that in a minute. After Servetus' final years, he ministered there for another 12 years until he died in 1564. Well, that's his life. What did he do in Geneva? Well, let's talk about his contributions first of all. First of all, he defined for us, and you know, one of the first people, and Oliver Cromwell picked up where John Calvin left off, if you will. John Calvin being the theoretician, if you will, but not just theory, practice too. Oliver Cromwell had to work it out in real life. in a very trying situation. But John Calvin made Oliver Cromwell possible because they understood that church and state weren't the same thing. Again, I hope you understand this. Up until Calvin, church and state were pretty much the same. Have you noticed? Have you noticed? We're almost back there. Have you noticed? How many people tell us to obey the state is to obey God? Almost sounds like a church and state are like the same thing again. Coming in through the back door. Commerce. John Calvin described the market. Now, I got a discussion just the other night with one of my kids about this. I don't like the term free market. And the reason why I don't like the term free market is that if it really is the market, it's free. So it's not the market and the free market, it's the market and the molested market. It's why I love, I hate going to them. See, this is where I'm a fraud right now. Okay, I hate yard sales. They're just, they all look the same to me. It's the same clothes pile over here and the same indefinable trinket table of stuff over here and somebody's broom that they should have thrown out. Instead they're trying to get a quarter for it, and I just don't like them. But I love the idea of yard sales. It is the market. Karl Marx thought he thought he knew the value of everything. You know how he came to that conclusion? He said, we can figure out how much it costs to make something, then we know what it's worth. Can you imagine the time he would have had when somebody's trying to sell their toaster for $1? He never did get the market. Calvin got the market. And he defined it. Listen to what he says. This is what he says about commerce. Now, listen, please observe this statement. He says, the purpose of the state in commerce is this, that every man's property be kept secure, that men may carry on innocent commerce with each other, that honesty and modesty may be cultivated, in short, that a public form of religion may exist among Christians and humanity among men. He got the role of the state in commerce. The role of the state in commerce is just to keep people from stealing from each other. That's it. We're not out here trying to make sure that everybody has the same income. We're not out here trying to make sure that everybody gets the same education. We're just out here as a state making sure that people don't steal from each other. Now, I know some of my Christian friends don't like the term libertarian, but because of this, I do consider myself, to some extent, a Christian libertarian, if that's what you believe. And even a lot of my, people I read, some of my Facebook friends and so forth, they still don't like this idea. We still have to have some sort of equality going on here. You know what Calvin realized? And I really have never read this from anyone else. Calvin realized the providential benefits of inequality. See, while most of our Christian friends are, oh yeah, we need the state out there, we need to make sure that everybody's equal economically and all that kind of stuff, and that's what it's supposed to be about. John Calvin saw a providence in inequality. Now why? Well, think about it. I mean, do you want all houses to look like your house? Do you want all the world to look like your neighborhood? We love variety. That's why we travel, right? We want to see something new. There is a tremendous providence in inequality in that some people have more. They can do things with more than I would do if I had the same amount of money or material. They do wonderful things often with that money that I wouldn't know how to do. What a wonderful thing it is that this person who knows how to use money has it. And if it's a good thing, think about this for a minute. If it's a good thing that the guy who has money and knows how to use it has it, is it not a good thing that the guy who doesn't know how to use money doesn't have a whole lot of it? I mean, I've been out to Las Vegas. What a waste. What a complete waste of resources. the providence, I hope you go home thinking about that. The providence of inequality. It's not talked about much in Christian circles. John Calvin understood it. Just one more thing about that. I get a kick out of some of my Christian friends who say, you know what? Really stink. The rich people really stink, you know. They need to be brought down a peg or two. Not realizing, you live here, you have what? You got a car, you got a roof over your head, you got running water. Guess what? You're rich. You know, that bring those rich down a peg or two. That's always someone else, isn't it? How fraudulent, how short-sighted, and how ungodly, quite frankly. People. He understood the value of people. People are the enemy of the modern state. You've known that, right? Amazing that Russia, the communists built they built the bamboo curtain, the iron curtain around their countries, their nations, their empires, so that people couldn't leave. And isn't that funny? Regimes that hate people have to build fences to keep the people in. You see, they hate people, but they don't hate them that much. They hate people, but they have to have some to be able to be to boss around. John Calvin saw that radically different. Listen to this. Listen to what he did in this city. Prior to Calvin's immigration in 1536, Geneva had 50 merchants, 3 printers, and few, if any, nobles. Sounds like a good place, doesn't it? No rich people. Listen what happened during Calvin's influential time there. Listen to this. It is a measure of the changes that occurred during Calvin's residence that by the late 1550s, so that's really 1536 to about 20 years, a little longer than that, Geneva was home to 180 merchants. So we've gone from 50 merchants to 180 merchants, 113 printers and publishers. So we've gone from 3 printers and publishers to 113, and at least 70 aristocratic refugees who claimed nobility in 20 years. And he did it with refugees. You know, you and I'd have a hard enough time trying to do that with a cream of the crop of name whatever hot school you want to name. Smart people, intelligent people, whatever. John Calvin is doing this with refugees. And refugees came to Geneva, and 20 years later, they were nobles. You know, we stand around and we wring our hands and say, what can we do to fix this? You know what? This country of ours could be fixed. And we know the answer. John Calvin had the answer there in Geneva. One of the things he loved about John Calvin, he understood the value of commerce. You know, this idea of, I must ask you, my friends, going from just a few printers to over 100, 3 printers to 113, just a few merchants to 50 merchants to 180. How many in our Christian circles today would see that as almost an obstacle, as an inconvenience? Kind of like, oh, what are we doing worrying about all these merchants and nobles and stuff like that? Our job is to preach the gospel. Don't you understand? Without the nobility here, without the people making money, you're not going to be able to support all these bookmakers, publishers. Can you imagine the amount of knowledge that flowered from the place because people were succeeding commercially? I know it doesn't sound very spiritual, but I know these missionaries don't go out there without some kind of support from back home called commerce. Geneva would continue to be a haven for French and Italian men of letters, publishers, and foreign dignitaries well into the 17th century. That's how long his influence actually lasts, and his influence still goes on. He understood people. He understood the value of people. Fourthly, theology. Much of our theology is influenced by Calvin. He worked out the doctrine of the Trinity. He certainly worked out the idea of Scriptures alone. He worked it out. It wasn't just a slogan for him. It worked out to everything in his life. He understood service. Poor man. He hated two things that I kind of like. Sleep and food. It isn't that he hated it, but he was constantly trying to be there. You got to get some sleep, you got to eat, and he didn't want to eat, he didn't want to sleep. So he suffered from migraine headaches, he had the gout. He really suffered from health problems, but he felt that he just had to keep writing, he had to keep preaching. He would also often preach 2 sermons a day in addition to his writing. Missions. Many of the refugees came and were taught by Calvin. What do you think happened after they were taught by Calvin? Some of them did set up shop and stay in Geneva. Many did. You know what many others did? They went back to Italy, they went back to Germany, and especially, toughest place of all, they went back to France. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine going back to the place that kicked you out in the beginning? That's where they went to. Many of them knew they were going to be killed, and many of them weren't. Most of them never came back to the mission again. They were killed or put in prison or died some way. He understood the value of calling. When John Calvin came along, this is pretty sacred stuff here. We still have this going on in our churches, I'm afraid. We have this idea that the hierarchy goes like this. Up here at the top are the missionaries. We can even subdivide them, right? Let's see, the clerical missionaries aren't quite up there with the get out there in the street missionaries. And the ultimate missionaries are the pith helmet guy with the machete hacking through the jungle that comes back with the cannibal stories. That's the guy that's going to raise the money. Now there's the ultimate Christian, right? And below the missionaries here are maybe the pastors. And below them, maybe some other people working at the church. And down here at the bottom are the kind of people that support them. You know, it's good we have people out there working to support the real Christians. John Calvin and Martin Luther both said enough. Your calling is your calling. And if God calls you to be an artisan or a farmer or a weaver or a butcher or a baker or a candlestick maker, be the best you can possibly be. It's that kind of theology that raised Geneva to what it was going to be. No one had to apologize for being the best of what they could possibly be. And this was new. This theology, this teaching was brand new because what they had before was Rome. And in Rome, the priests and the monks were it. And if you really were going to serve God, you became a monk. And if you weren't that serious about serving God, you stayed home and you worked the farm. So we understood these things. Let's look at his legacy. The personality of this thin, short, frail man was complex. This is from Otto Scott. And suffered from the usual lack of comprehension that attends genius. He had a strong will and remarkable energy, but was often ill. Surrounded by lesser minds, he often lost his temper, and he had frightful migraines. I say surrounded by lesser minds. There are some people who believe that he knew up to 25 languages. But he was not sour. His gift for making and keeping friends was extraordinary. Farrell, Melanchthon, Bullinger, Kopp was one of his early professors. Knox and others remained close to him throughout all vicissitudes, all his adventures, and he to them. That speaks volumes. All he went through, and he still had some close friends. He was not perfect. Look at this. This one surprised me. Painfully sensitive to criticism. Painfully sensitive to criticism? You know, when he walked through Geneva sometimes, the people who didn't like him sick their dogs on him. He could hardly bear opposition. He had trouble believing that he could be wrong. In that, he was hardly unique among the theologians of his time, that's for sure. And Calvin was, like all men, a man of his times. This dour guy, he liked wine and bowling and indulged both, even on Sundays. lived simply, slept only 6 hours a day, never took a holiday, refused increases in salary, and raised money for the poor. He was musical, introduced singing at Strasbourg, and had music included in the ecclesiastical ordinances of Geneva. I love this quote. It's not what your friends say about you, it's what your enemies say. The strength of that heretic, said Pope Pius IV, consisted in this, that money never had the slightest charm for him. If I had such servants, my dominion would extend from sea to sea. High praise. High praise from the Pope. Well, we'll wrap it up with this statement here, this comment. Before I do that, I got to get back to Servetus. Apologize for that. Thought I had a note here. Servetus, Michael Servetus. You have to know about him. Michael Servetus was burned at the stake in Geneva while Calvin was there. I had a conversation with a pastor recently who told me that it was Calvin's fault that he was burned at the stake. Now we have to lay this out. Michael Servetus was a qualified heretic, and the Roman Catholics were lucky that he came to Geneva, because they were trying to catch him they knew he was traveling around incognito in France, and the Roman Catholics had a bounty on his head, if you will, because he denied the Trinity and he taught other people so. Michael Servetus was a very bright man. He was from Spain, but the Roman Catholics in France were trying to kill him. They would put him on trial and kill him. Well, he traveled all over the place. He winds up back in Geneva. He leaves again. He challenges Calvin to a debate. This is before he got in real trouble. Calvin took him on, but Servetus didn't show up, and he was lost again. Well, he finally makes his way back to Geneva, this Michael Servetus guy, and he gets put on trial by the city fathers for heresy. Now, what you will hear all the time is that Calvin burnt Michael Servetus. It's simply not true. John Calvin had nothing to do with the trial, except he was told to examine Servetus to see if he was a heretic. And Servetus continued to deny the Trinity. That's all that happened. He just brought back his findings. When finally Servetus was condemned to death, John Calvin pleaded with the city fathers to have him beheaded instead of burnt, as more of a, if I had my choice, I think I know what I'd pick. Not being burned at the stake. In the end, Calvin did decide a single detail of that whole Servetus trial, and yet, you go home and do it tonight, do a little Google search, Servetus, Calvin, Geneva, and you will have even Christian people saying, yeah, that John Calvin's really horrible for burning Michael Servetus at the stake. Did not happen. If you want the details, they're in Otto Scott's book. Yeah, and you know that's true, because when John Calvin had his bags packed half the time when he was in Geneva. He's like presented as the dictator of Geneva. He was at war with this. He was never a city councilman. He never held civil authority in Geneva, ever. And he's called the dictator of Geneva. Most of the time he had his bags packed. This is not well known. He lived the rest of his life in Geneva thinking that they might kick him out again, and this time it's going to be a little bit easier to get out of Dodge. He lived with borrowed furniture most of his life. Dictator of Geneva. And yet this is still believed by an awful lot of our Christian friends. That's Servetus. If you want to know more about him, we can talk about him a little bit more. I just want to wrap up from a quote from Tom Steeler, who wrote The Church and Western Culture, an introduction to Christian history about Calvin. Though he never held public office, Calvin influenced the whole community of Geneva. He established a strong Reformed church in the city and worked to make the city's laws more humane, including taking better care of the poor and aged. Commerce was the life of Geneva, and Calvin did not stand in the way of its development. The growth of commerce in Geneva promoted the emergence of a middle class. His goal was to make Geneva a Christian commonwealth. I want to talk briefly there about that middle class thing. Practically speaking, without a middle class, you don't have real commerce going on. Because the real commerce is consistently done by the middle class. Now, we can't make real sharp distinctions all the time, but without the middle class, you just don't, you have tyranny, you have slavery, but you don't have commerce without a middle class. And then this next statement, his goal was to make Geneva a Christian commonwealth. Now, forgive me, my Mars friends, for this. Forgive me for this drum I keep beating all the time. But why is it that we have to defend the idea of a Christian commonwealth? It's already been done. And it succeeded spectacularly. And we still have to promote the idea, you have to convince our Christian friends, yeah, a Christian commonwealth would be a good thing. Why, oh why do we still have to fight this battle? As if we have to convince somebody that a Christian family would be a good thing. His goal was to make Geneva a Christian commonwealth. Laws were clear in Geneva. The difficulties of enforcement must have been extreme, for never in history had such a strict virtue been required of a city. Theological and civil laws seemed to be well understood in the city and were well supported by leading citizens. There's your business people there, your nobles, your commerce people. People that are involved in commerce and trade understand the value of law better than most. Many Protestants found refuge in Geneva. One such person was Bernardino Ochino, an Italian Protestant who wrote the following in 1542. Listen to what he says. Cursing and swearing, unchastity, sacrilege, adultery, and impure living, such as prevail in many places I have lived, are here unknown. There are no pimps and harlots. Games of chance are not customary. Benevolence is so great that the poor need not beg. No beggars in Geneva. And this last one might be the best of all. Lawsuits are banished from the city. Sounds like a good place to be. Similarly, in 1610, years later, Valentin Andrea, a Lutheran minister from Germany, wrote this. This is long after Calvin's off the scene. When I was in Geneva, I observed something great, which I shall remember and desire as long as I live. There is in that city not only the perfect institute of a perfect republic, all cursing and swearing, gambling, luxury, strife, hatred, fraud, etc. are forbidden, while greater sins are unheard of. Did you get the significance of that statement? See, they come at us all the time and say, what do you want? You want heaven on earth? You want a perfect place on earth? Well, you know what? Maybe we can't bring heaven to earth. But you kick God and Christ out of it, and what do you think you're left with? It's not heaven on earth. You know, it's kind of funny to say you can't bring heaven on earth. Yeah, I can't do that. But you know what? Look around, because plenty of people sure brought hell on earth. And who's going to stop it? Who's going to challenge it? Calvin did, as this Lutheran minister realized. What a glorious ornament of the Christian religion is such a purity of morals. We must lament with tears that it is wanting with us Germans and almost totally neglected. He says, I'm crying. We have nothing like this in Germany. That's a sad situation that we don't. Finally, from Streeter, the reputation of Geneva attracted refugees from all directions. The city leaders opened the gates to the city for people from France, Holland, Spain, Scotland, Italy, Germany, Hungary, Poland, and elsewhere. So why does Geneva matter? Geneva matters because Geneva didn't pop up out of the sand of the desert and become this Mecca, if you will, for everybody to come to. Geneva matters because Geneva turns itself around by the grace of God and the influence of Calvin, if you will, and others that supported him. It turned around from being a Las Vegas, if you will, to being a Christian Commonwealth. We're told it can't be done. I've been told that myself. Can't be done. My friends, Geneva matters because it has been done.